Hi, my name is Luna, and the day I inherited $31 million, my father burned the check in front of me without blinking. Let me explain. It was a gray Monday in Savannah, Georgia. One of those southern spring mornings where the air feels like it can't decide whether to rain or bloom. I wore a navy blue blazer that hadn't seen daylight since my college interviews, and heels that clicked loudly against the marbled floor of the Whitmore and Green law offices. I didn't wear them for style, I wore them for the sound. That sharp, determined click that made me feel like I was walking into a courtroom. Not a family gathering. Not that anyone noticed. My mother, Elaine, barely looked up from her phone when I walked in. My father, Richard, gave me a glance so brief you'd think I was delivering Postmates. And my cousin, well, my adopted cousin Madeline Mads Carter, she was already reclined in the leather armchair. Sunglasses perched atop her head like she was early for brunch. Not a will reading. Wallace Green, my grandfather's longtime attorney, cleared his throat with the ceremonial weight of someone who'd been preparing for this moment longer than any of us. We are here, he began, to carry out the final will and testament of Henry Whitmore. The room went silent, the smell of lemon wood polish mixed with the tension. I took the last available chair at the table, always last. Always quiet, per Mr. Whitmore's explicit request. Wallace continued. All immediate family members are present. He opened the first folder. To Madeline Carter. He read, he leaves the Charleston estate and his full vintage wine collection. Madeline smirked, nodded like she'd expected it. To Richard and Elaine Beckett. Wallace said next, he leaves the Philatelic Society collection and a $20 Society collection and a $20 Cotter 8. 000 donation in their name to the Georgia Wildlife Conservation Fund. My mother stiffened. Excuse me, my father barked a laugh. This is absurd. Wallace didn't flinch. He turned the page and looked directly at me. And to Luna Beckett, he said, his voice steady. Mr. Whitmore leaves the remainder of his financial estate, totaling $31 million. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished wood table. What? My father snapped. Wallace nodded. It was signed and notarized 2 months before his passing. Mr. Whitmore was clear, intentional, and fully aware. She hasn't even spoken to us in 5 years. My mother hissed. She walked out on this family. She abandoned us. My father added, rising from his seat. She doesn't get to come back now and collect a fortune like some prodigal saint. Wallace, to his credit, remained composed. He reached beneath the desk and pulled out a sealed envelope stamped with my grandfather's wax crest, a small horse he carved himself. I reached for it with trembling fingers. Inside a folded check and a handwritten note. For the one who stayed silent and stayed strong, you were never forgotten. Before I could even reread it, my father lunged. He yanked the check from my lap, examined it like it might be fake. My mother grabbed the note, ripped it once, then again, until the words turned to slivers. You think silence is loyalty, she spat. You think walking away made you noble? She cut us off. Madeline added smugly. And Grandpa was just trying to compensate for her guilt trip. That's when my father pulled out the lighter. I'm not letting her buy her way back into this family. Richard, Wallace warned. But the flame was already lit. The check curled, blackened, and turned to ash in the crystal tray on the table. There. My father growled. Now we're even. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. I just stared at the rising smoke like it was incense at a funeral, one I wasn't invited to. What they didn't know was simple: the check was fake. Adekoi. My grandfather warned me they'd try to destroy what they couldn't control. So we planned for it. The real transfer wired to a trust. Already secured. Already mine. So I stood. No drama. No outburst. Just the slow, deliberate tap of my heels as I walked out of that room. No goodbye. No vengeance. Just quiet power. Outside. The Georgia air smelled like wet magnolias and Reckoning 720 magnolias and Reckoning. And as I opened the folder tucked beneath my coat, the one marked open only if they burn it, I smiled. Let them think they won. That's where the real story begins. They say family shapes you. But no one warns you how much it can break you before it even begins to build. I didn't drive home after the will reading. I didn't have a home to go back to, not one that felt like mine. Anyway, instead, I checked into a modest motel on the outskirts of Savannah. Same one I used to pass every weekend on my bike as a kid. You're always wondering who stayed there and why. Now I knew. The room smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. Like someone had tried to scrub out bad memories but never quite managed to erase them. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They weren't shaking. They should have been. I reached into my coat and pulled out the letter that my father hadn't destroyed. The one he didn't know existed. It was hidden in the lining stitched there by my own hand. Just as Grandpa told me to. I unfolded it carefully. My grandfather's handwriting. Neat and looping. Like the birthday cards he used to write when I still lived in the big house with the white shutters and the cold silences. Dear Luna. If they burn it, let them. That isn't your loss, it's their fear. Real power isn't loud. It's patient. You were always the one who listened more than you spoke. And I saw every single time they made you feel like you were less for it. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Growing up, I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I was the quiet one. The helper. The one who cleaned up after family dinners while Madeline made excuses to go meet friends or reapply lip gloss. I never demanded anything. Not affection. Not attention. Definitely not money. But the older I got, the more I realized in our family. Invisibility was not a virtue. It was a sentence. When I was 16, my parents stopped funding my piano lessons. No explanation. Just we're reallocating expenses. That same month, Madeline got a car. Not a hand-me-down. A brand new black Audi with custom plates. I remember asking my mom why. I wasn't accusing. Just curious. She looked at me for a long second. Then said, because she asks, Luna, you never do. 2 years later, they forgot to send my college application fees. I scrambled to cover them with money I made tutoring kids in math, ironic. Considering I was planning to major in literature. By sophomore year, I'd had enough. The day I came home for winter break, I found my bedroom stripped bare. Desk gone. Bed gone. Posters gone. In its place, a yoga mat. A bookshelf full of Mad's poetry books. And a faux fur beanbag chair. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before my mom breezed by and said, we figured you'd be staying in the dorms mostly. Mads needed space for her meditation. I remember nodding. Not asking why. Not crying. Just nodding. That night, I slept in the basement on a couch with a spring that poked my spine every time I shifted. I whispered to myself, just get through it. And I did. I finished college with scholarships and late-night shifts at a 24-hour diner. I moved to a small studio in Atlanta. I built a freelance business editing grant proposals and nonprofit reports. Nothing fancy. But it was mine. All mine. I didn't call. Didn't visit. I wasn't angry, I was just done. They called it abandonment. I called it survival. And yet, even in my silence, I never imagined they'd try to erase me completely. I thought staying away would be enough, that not fighting them meant they'd forget the fight altogether. But they never forgot. They just waited. Waited for the right moment to prove to the world that I wasn't part of the family anymore. Too bad Grandpa had different plans. Back in the motel room, I opened the duffel bag I'd carried with me. I pulled out the scarf Grandpa gave me when I turned 10, a faded wool blend with little stitched stars in the corners. I wrapped it around my shoulders. Even though the room was warm, that scarf had more warmth in it than most of my childhood. I lay back on the bed, eyes open, watching the ceiling fan spin slow circles like the hands of a clock. I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew this much, the girl they erased, she's not the woman holding the truth now. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. Fear had already come and gone like a hurricane loud. Brutal. And over in minutes. What was left behind was something quieter. Sharper. Not revenge. Not anger. Clarity. At 7:14 a.m., I folded the motel blanket, slipped my grandfather's scarf around my neck, and stepped into the misty Savannah morning like I belonged to it. The streets were still damp from the night's rain. Sidewalks glistened like wet glass, and as I turned the corner onto Madison Street, the bank's stone facade came into view. Whitmore Private Banking. It had always sounded too proud. Too proper. But it was Grandpa's world. This was where his legacy had lived long before he ever breathed the word inheritance. Inside, the lobby felt like time had slowed. Polished marble floors, brass railings, chandeliers that hummed above like frozen constellations. I walked up to the reception desk, where a young woman in a burgundy blazer looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning," she said. "Can I help you? My name is Luna Beckett." I replied, "I'm here to access a private vault registered under Henry Whitmore's estate. Box number 9. Her fingers clicked the keyboard with practiced ease. After a moment, she nodded. "Yes. Miss Beckett, everything is in order. Do you have the key?" I reached into my coat pocket and held out a small brass key worn at the edges, engraved with a single letter W. Grandpa had given it to me 2 years ago at a diner just off I-95. He'd slid it across the table next to my soup and said, "You won't need this until they show you who they really are." That was it. No more. No less. The receptionist took the key, verified my ID, and led me through a heavy oak door into the vault corridor. The air changed, instantly cooler. Heavier. Like secrets lived in the walls? We stopped at box 9. "I'll give you privacy," she said gently and stepped out. I slid the key into the lock. It clicked with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. The drawer rolled open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside were 3 things: a black velvet pouch, a thick legal envelope, sealed in wax, and a folded check. I took the check first. It was real. Crisp. Heavy paper. $31 million. It made out to me in my grandfather's exact looping script. Signed. Dated. Stamped. I ran my fingers along the ink like it might smudge. It didn't. The second item, the legal envelope. I broke the seal carefully. Inside were multiple documents. An updated will, dated 2 months before his passing. naming me sole beneficiary of all liquid assets, a trust agreement with my name on it, a letter from his attorney confirming its validity, and attached handwritten notes in Grandpa's familiar scrawl. Elaine insisted Madeline should handle the trust. Said you'd squander it. Richard said you were too quiet to lead. I disagreed. The last document, a notarized power of attorney form Grandpa, had prepared weeks before his final hospitalization. He didn't trust them. He'd planned for all of this. My throat tightened, but not with grief. With relief? Vindication. Then, I opened the velvet pouch. A flash drive. I hesitated for a moment, then slipped it into my laptop, which I'd brought with me in my bag. The screen flickered, then came to life. There he was. Grandpa, sitting in his sunroom, sunlight warming the creases of his weathered face. He looked older than I remembered, but not weaker. Just tired. The way someone looks when they've carried truth too long. If you're watching this, he said, it means they tried to destroy what I left you. His voice was low, steady. I'm sorry for that. I saw what they did. Luna, the way they left you out, the way they made you feel like love had terms. I didn't say anything then. I should have. That's on me. He leaned forward in his chair. But listen to me now. What you have isn't just money. It's proof of who you are, of what they tried to erase. So don't shout. Don't fight them loud. Just move wisely. Quiet power is the sharpest kind. He smiled small. Sad. But sûr. You're not forgotten. You never were. The video ended. The screen dimmed. I sat there for a while. Alone in the quiet room of vaults and steel and silence. I held the check, the letter, the USB drive. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I felt real. Not because of the money, not because I won, but because someone had seen me the whole time and left me the tools to build myself back up. I left the bank with everything I needed: the truth, the proof, and something no one could burn: my name. The day Madeline called me, the sky over Savannah was a soft, washed-out gray. One of those in-between days that made you wonder whether to bring an umbrella or just risk it. My phone buzzed at 6:13 a.m. No caller ID. Normally, I would have let it ring. But something, maybe instinct, maybe intuition, made me answer. Luna, her voice was too sweet. Too warm? It's meds. I know it's early. I'm sorry. I thought maybe we could talk. Just us. I didn't say anything right away. She continued. I thought we could grab coffee. Like we used to. You pick the place. The last time she said just us. I ended up being blamed for ruining Mom's 50th birthday dinner because I wore black instead of pastels. Still, I heard myself say, 11. Cornerstone Cafe. Perfect. She said, too quickly. We hung up. I deleted her number again. Just in case, I didn't do much that morning. I let a pot of tea go cold. Walked the apartment 3 times, like I was looking for something I knew wasn't there. I reread part of Grandpa's trust paperwork just to calm my hands. I wasn't nervous. Just alert. At 10:55, I stepped into Cornerstone Cafe. It smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon. Same as it did in college. Madeline had already claimed the old corner booth by the window. Same spot we always used during finals week, far from the heater. Close to the exit. She stood when she saw me. Almost went in for a hug. Then stopped herself. Luna, she breathed. It's been too long. I said nothing and slid into the booth. She had a baby pink sweater on, delicate earrings, a cup of black coffee that didn't look touched. She smiled like we were two friends catching up, not two survivors of a family war. Remember this place, she said, stirring her cup even though it didn't need it. You used to highlight your flashcards like your life depended on it. I just stress-ate banana bread? I gave a faint nod. You used to take my tea when you ran out of money. She added with a small laugh. I remember. I said. There was a silence, then soft hip stretched. She leaned in. Mom's not the same since the will reading. She's barely sleeping. Dad's angry. They feel like you cut them out. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't speak. I mean, I get it. She said quickly. You always felt like the outsider, but doing this, it's cruel. Luna. You know that, right? I sipped my tea slowly. Let the silence work for me. She kept going. Even Grandpa, he said, you held things too tightly. That you were distant. Did he say that to you? I asked, meeting her eyes. Or did someone tell you that's what he said? Her jaw clenched. Just for a second. I'm just saying. She said. No one wants this family to fall apart. I looked out the window. Then she said it. The real reason she came. That check? The one you let Dad burn? Was it real? I set my cup down gently. It was just paper. I said. She blinked. What? It's gone now. The silence turned sharp. Her expression flickered. The smile dissolving like sugar in bitter tea. Whatever Grandpa left you. She said. Her voice low. Don't make this worse than it has to be. This family has already lost so much. I stood. Pulled on my coat. Then maybe it's time to stop losing. I said. I didn't look back. Outside, the air had shifted. The clouds thinned but held on like they weren't ready to let the sun break through just yet. A breeze picked up as I walked toward my car. I didn't rush. But something caught my eye when I reached my front door that evening. Taped just beneath the peephole, a plain white envelope. No name. No return address. The handwriting was tight. Deliberate. Angled like it had been written under pressure. Something about it tickled a memory I couldn't quite place. I peeled it off carefully, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at it. Not Grandpa's handwriting. Not legal mail. I opened it. One sentence. Printed on thick paper, what they burned wasn't the real check. Don't speak. Just move wisely. Look in box array at Southern Safeco. You'll understand everything. That was it. No name. No signature. No return address. But it was enough. I reread it 5 times. On the 6th, I slid the note under my cookbook. Like hiding it made it more real. Then I opened the drawer by the stove. There it was. The brass key Grandpa had given me on my 26th birthday. Wrapped in a blue handkerchief? Tucked inside a cigar box, he swore never to open until I was ready to reclaim myself. I used to think it was a metaphor, some poetic Whitmore thing. But as I held the key in my hand now, solid. Cool. It's etched with the letter A on the base. I knew it wasn't a symbol. It was a map. Southern Safeco. I wasn't what I expected. It wasn't tucked behind some corporate glass building or buried in a gated estate. No. It was hidden in plain sight between a closed-down bookstore and a run-down pharmacy on Abercorn Street. You could walk by it 100 times and never know something valuable lived beneath its rusted awning. I stood outside for a moment, clutching the key in my coat pocket like it could read my pulse. The clouds had thickened again. A drizzle hung in the air. Not quite rain, but enough to make the street look like it was holding its breath. I stepped inside. The lobby was dim, lit only by a single lamp hanging low over the front desk. No music. No security guards. Just a woman with silver hair tied into a neat braid, reading a tattered crime novel behind the counter. She looked up when I entered. "Help you?" she asked. Her voice gravelly but calm. "I'm here for box array." I said, "I have the key." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. She simply reached under the desk, pulled out a large leather-bound ledger, and flipped it open with a thud. "Name?" she asked. "Luna Beckett." She scanned the page, then looked at me. "Haven't had a Beckett down here since Henry." My heart posed. "He was my grandfather," I said. She gave a small nod, closed the ledger, and stood up. "Follow me." She led me down a narrow hallway that smelled like cold metal and forgotten secrets. Every few feet, we passed heavy steel doors labeled with strange codes Z4, T3, M1. At the very end of the hall was a door marked simply RA. She turned to me. "Only the registered key opens this. No backup. No override." I pulled the brass key from my pocket and slid it into the lock. For a second, nothing happened. Then click, the door creaked open, revealing a small, climate-controlled room. A single box sat in the center on a marble pedestal, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in deep navy cloth. The woman didn't enter. "I'll give you privacy," she said. When she was gone, I stepped forward and unwrapped the cloth. Underneath was a walnut box. Elegant. Minimal. A golden latch at the front. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things: a smaller envelope with my name on it, a thumb drive in a velvet lining, and an old photograph of me and Grandpa sitting under the magnolia tree in his backyard. I was maybe 5. I was laughing. He looked at peace. I picked up the envelope. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink. I unfolded the letter and began to read, "Luna, if you've made it here, then you already know the truth was never meant to be public. Not at first, but now, it must be. What I left in the other vault was real, but it was incomplete. The money wasn't the point. This is..." I felt the weight of the thumb drive in my palm. On this drive is a document trail your parents hoped would disappear. Legal transfers, forged amendments, false medical authorizations they filed while I was in recovery. They planned to lock me out of my own estate. They were close. Luna. Too close. But I beat them by days. The words blurred. My fingers tightened around the paper. The law will be on your side now. I've insured it. But power, real power, is never just legal. It's moral. What you do next will define whether this was about winning or about truth. You don't need to destroy them. You only need to shine enough light that they can no longer hide. I looked back at the photo. That little girl in the picture didn't know what she'd grow up to carry. She didn't know about betrayal, or forged wills, or the kind of pain that sneaks into your bones when the people you love call you a stranger. But I did. And now, I also knew something else. I wasn't alone anymore. Not in spirit, not in truth, and not in the fight. I placed the thumb drive gently in my purse, folded the letter, took one last look at the room and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." As I locked the door behind me, the silver-haired woman looked up. "You get what you needed?" she asked. I nodded. "I got more than that." She gave a knowing smile. That's the kind of box this is. Outside. The rain had stopped. The street glistened like glass again. Like everything had been rinsed clean. And for the first time in years, so had I. They say families break in silence first. At dinner tables. In the spaces between words. In the tight smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. But sometimes, the break is loud. And this time, it was going to echo. I arrived at the Whitmore estate just before sunset. The house still looked perfect from the outside, white columns glowing in the golden hour light, hedges clipped to geometric precision. The flagstone path swept clean. But I wasn't fooled. Perfection. I'd learned. Could be a cage too. I didn't ring the bell. I used the side entrance, the one Grandpa always used when he didn't want to make an entrance. I knew the code. Some habits never The drawing room was where I found them. Elaine. My mother. Sat stiffly on the cream sofa. Legs crossed. A crystal glass of white wine trembling ever so slightly in her hand. Richard. My father. Stood near the fireplace. Arms folded. Wearing the same navy blazer he wore to every important family confrontation. And Madeline, of course she was there perched by the window, pretending not to notice my arrival until she absolutely had to. Well, Richard said, not even pretending to smile. Look who finally came home. This was never home, I replied, placing my bag gently on the side table. Elaine didn't look at me. Let's just get to the point, she said. You've made your statement. You've claimed your inheritance. You've burned the bridge. I pulled the folded letter from my coat pocket and placed it gently on the table between us. No, I said. What I burned was your version of the story. This, I tapped the envelope, is the truth. Madeline shifted uncomfortably. What is it? Proof. I said. Of what you tried to take. Forged documents. Illegal transfers. The real reason Grandpa changed the trust in the first place. Elaine's jaw twitched. Richard took a step forward. That's a serious accusation. Luna, it's not an accusation, I said calmly. It's a record. I pulled out the second folder, the one Grandpa's lawyer had prepared for this exact moment. You didn't just try to cut me out. You tried to erase him. His words, his wishes, his legacy. Elaine stood. Her wine sloshed over the edge of the glass. You always played the victim. She spat. Always acted like you were the wounded one. Henry was old. He was confused. You manipulated him enough. I said, my voice low, but unwavering. Silence. For the first time. Real silence. I turned to Richard. You made him sign power of attorney paperwork while he was sedated. You told the hospital he was a fall risk. You filed emergency control over his trust illegally. And when he found out, he gave me the real documents. The real will. The real trust. Richard opened his mouth. But I kept going. I have audio recordings. Dates. Signatures. Witnesses. You want to fight this in court? Fine. But make no mistake, this time, it won't be quiet. Madeline stood now too. Her voice a whisper. Luna, what do you want? And for a moment, I really looked at her. My sister. The girl I used to braid hair with on stormy nights. The girl who once cried in my lap over a lost college scholarship. But that girl, she was gone. I want the truth restored. I said, publicly, I want an acknowledgement that what you did was wrong. That I didn't steal anything, I reclaimed what was mine. Elaine laughed bitterly. So you want revenge? No, I said softly. I want peace. But peace doesn't come without truth. I handed her the letter Grandpa had written. The one that said, in his own words, that he had seen what they were doing and had chosen me. Not out of pity, but out of trust. As she read, her face didn't move, but her hands did. They trembled. Slightly. Just enough for me to know that something inside her cracked. Richard stepped back. Madeline said nothing. And I finally felt taller than all three of them. I don't need your apology, I said, gathering my things. I just need your silence. From now on, we don't pretend. We don't perform. You live your life. I live mine. And you leave Grandpa's name out of your mouths unless you're ready to speak the truth. I walked out. And this time, no one followed. Outside, the last light of the sun was bleeding into the trees. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the magnolia tree Grandpa once planted the year I was born. It was the same tree we sat under in that old photo. And now I knew why he had kept that photo. Tucked in a box beneath the city. Hidden from everyone but me. Because he knew someday I'd come looking. And that when I did, I'd be ready not to destroy, but to rebuild. Not to win, but to remember. 2 days after that confrontation, I found myself sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor of Grandpa's study. The house had been sealed for weeks after his passing, dust dancing in slivers of sunlight through the shutters. It still smelled like leather and pipe tobacco. The scent embedded in the mahogany shelves and worn armchair where he used to read. I hadn't come back here since the funeral. I wasn't ready. Maybe I still wasn't. But something inside told me there was one more truth waiting. I opened the drawer beneath the bookshelf. The one with the rusted brass handle he always told us was off limits, unless you're lost or brave. I guess I was both now. Inside, there wasn't much. A few black notebooks filled with sketches of garden plans and slash in 11 or 11 it. An old compass. And at the very back, a sealed brown envelope. It didn't have my name on it. Just one word. In Grandpa's slanted handwriting, forgiveness. My throat tightened. I stared at it for a long moment, afraid that opening it would undo the calm I'd finally built. But I did. And what I found was not a legal document. Not evidence. Not strategy. It was a letter. Handwritten. Raw. If you're reading this, Luna, then the truth is out. You did what I couldn't. You stood against them when I kept trying to love them into being better. This isn't a letter about inheritance or law. This is about the part of the story I never told you because I was ashamed. I held my breath. Years ago, when your father was in financial trouble, deep trouble, I gave him power of attorney for the Whitmore Trust, thinking he'd use it to keep the family afloat. Instead, he forged signatures, moved money into shell companies, and tried to blame it on bad investments. Elaine covered for him. Madeline helped bury the paper trail. I wanted to believe it was just a mistake. One mistake. But mistakes don't come with bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. My hands began to shake. I kept quiet to protect the family name, and because I believed they would stop. But people don't stop when they think no one's watching. They get better at hiding. That's when I realized the only person in this family who never wanted anything from me was you. I closed my eyes. I gave you the smallest gifts over the years not because I loved you less, but because I didn't want you to ever owe me. I wanted you to know you were enough without my money. Without my name. Tears slid down my cheeks before I even felt them. But I was wrong to protect them at your expense. And I'm sorry. I read that line over and over. I'm sorry. 3 words I never thought I'd hear from anyone in this family, and especially not from the one man who owed me the least. You're going to be tempted now to prove them wrong, to tear them apart. But Luna, the strongest person in the room, is the one who doesn't need to crush anyone to stand tall. Your strength is not revenge. It's restoration. Use what I've given you not just to protect yourself, but to build something they can't touch, something that lives beyond the walls of this house, a life that is yours. Free, whole, and bigger than any courtroom victory. At the bottom of the letter, one final line, P.S. The magnolia tree in the backyard, dig 2 feet to the east. I left something for you there too. Something beautiful. I folded the letter with shaking hands. Not because I needed to hide it, but because it felt sacred. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I stood beneath the old magnolia tree, the same one from the photo. The same one where I first heard Grandpa whisper stories about what it means to be brave. I dug with my bare hands. And there, in a tin box sealed with wax, I found a stack of letters. Not for me. For him, dozens of them. Letters Grandpa had written over the years to himself, to God, to my grandmother, to his regrets, his dreams, his disappointments. Each one, a window into the heart of a man who had carried more weight than he ever let us see. And tied to the bundle with twine. A simple chain with a silver pendant. Inside the pendant, a pressed magnolia petal. Perfectly preserved. I clutched it to my chest. It wasn't worth anything to the world. But to me, it was everything. A reminder that even the most broken stories still have roots that grow. That even the people we thought we knew can still hold unknown depths. That forgiveness is not always asked for, but sometimes it's left behind like breadcrumbs. So we can find our way home. I didn't know it at the time. But something shifted in me after I found that letter. Not in a loud, cinematic way. No swelling music. No dramatic monologue in a mirror. Just quieter mornings. Calmer thoughts. The storm that had lived in my chest for years began to thin out. Like fog after rain. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I began to think about a life beyond survival. I stayed in Savannah longer than planned. The house was still technically mine now, though I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. But something told me not to leave. Not yet. There was still more healing to do. Still more of me to find. It started with a journal. Just a plain, lined notebook I bought from a corner bookstore. I hadn't written anything for myself in years, only emails, court responses, and bitter letters I never sent. But one morning, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and wrote just 3 words, "Who is Luna?" That question haunted me in the best possible way. Because I wasn't just Henry Beckett's granddaughter anymore. I wasn't the girl cast aside by her family, or the woman who came back swinging. I was more than the fight. More than the wounds. More than the past. So, I let myself rediscover the pieces. I visited the farmer's market every Saturday. Talked to strangers. Bought peaches that reminded me of summers on Grandpa's porch. I wandered through antique stores and bought a chipped teacup just because it felt like it had a story. I even joined a local storytelling group just to listen at first. Then slowly, to speak. One night, I shared part of my story. Not the whole saga, just a single thread. About a magnolia tree. A man who left behind letters instead of apologies. A woman learning how to breathe again. The group sat in silence when I finished. Then, an older woman with silver curls reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're not just surviving," she said. "You're blooming." That's when I knew I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life defining myself by the people who tried to erase me. I wanted to build something. Something that lasted. Something that grew. That week, I filed paperwork to convert Grandpa's property into a foundation. Not a trust fund. Not a museum. But a community space, part literacy center, part women's co-op, part garden. A place for people who were rebuilding. People who had been silenced, written off, cast aside. People like me. I named it the Magnolia Room, a tribute to the place where I was once loved without condition. I hired local teachers, invited speakers, partnered with a counseling group that offered free grief and trauma support. It wasn't big. Not yet. But the first time I walked into the space after we'd painted the walls soft blue and hung Grandpa's old compass above the door, I felt something I hadn't in years. Pride. Not the kind that comes from proving someone wrong. The kind that comes from proving yourself right when no one else saw your worth. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Madeline. I don't know how to face you. She wrote, but I've been watching. Quietly. And I see now what I never saw before. Not just what they did to you, but what you did after. I don't have an excuse. But I want to find my own truth now. If there's still room to try. I stared at that line for a long time. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Either. Sometimes, it's a seed you plant in the middle of old soil, not knowing if it will take root. I wrote her back. Told her the Magnolia Room had open doors, that she could visit when she was ready. No pressure. Just light. That same week, I spoke publicly for the first time at a community event in the local library. I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough. Enough to understand why spaces like this mattered. Why truth mattered. Why we don't just heal alone, we heal together. After my speech, a teenage girl approached me. She had tearful eyes and calloused hands. "You're the reason I haven't given up," she said quietly. And that was it. The moment it all came full circle, I wasn't just Luna Beckett, survivor of betrayal. I was Luna Beckett, builder of something better. A story worth passing on. A life I had chosen, not the one left behind for me. It was one of those quiet, golden mornings when everything felt still. The kind of morning where the air tastes like peace, and the birds don't seem in a rush to go anywhere. I was sitting on the porch swing of the Magnolia Room, watching the sun stretch over the garden beds, the same ones we'd planted just last season: lavender, tomatoes, rosemary, magnolias. And I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. Not from betrayal. Not from silence. Not even from my past. I had arrived. Not at a destination, but at myself. And that's when I knew I needed to write her. Not Madeline, not Elaine, not even Grandpa, but her, the woman I used to be. So I walked into the main hall, grabbed a notebook from the shelf by the fireplace, and sat down beneath the compass on the wall. The same compass Grandpa once carried in his pocket. I opened the first page and began Lieber. Dear me. I know you're hurting. You probably think you've lost everything right now: your family, your place in the world, your voice. You're sitting in that cheap apartment with the broken heat, staring at a world that seems determined to forget you ever mattered. And I won't lie to you. There are going to be nights when the weight of silence feels heavier than the loudest lie. There will be mornings when your hands shake just from holding a cup of coffee. But I need you to hear this: you're not broken. You're becoming. Every betrayal carved a path toward truth. Every closed door cleared space for a new one to open. And even though they tried to write you out of the story, even though you almost believed them, you are the story. I know you're angry. You have every right to be, but I want you to hold on to something bigger than anger. Hold on to dignity. Because there will come a day not far from now when you walk into a room and the whole air changes. Not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. You'll build something sacred from the pieces they left behind. You'll speak to rooms full of strangers and they'll cry. Not because your story is sad, but because it reminds them they're not alone. You'll love again. Not just others, but yourself. You'll look in the mirror and finally see someone whole. And one day, years from now, a young girl will walk through the doors of something you built. And she'll say, because of you, I didn't give up. And that, my love, is the moment it will all make sense. So breathe. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because that pain is making space for something beautiful to grow. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not too late. You are Luna. And Luna was always meant to rise. I stopped writing there. Tears blurred the ink. But for the first time, I didn't cry out of grief or fury or exhaustion. I cried because I finally believed the words I'd written. They weren't just hopeful, they were true. In the weeks that followed, I started a writing program at the Magnolia Room. We called it Letters to Ourselves. Every Tuesday night, women, some young, some grandmothers gathered in the circle room with tea and candles and wrote letters to the versions of themselves they had once abandoned, betrayed, forgotten, or buried. And what bloomed from those nights was nothing short of holy. One woman forgave herself for staying in a toxic marriage. Another wrote to the 15-year-old girl she never protected. A third, trembling but brave, read her letter aloud and said, I didn't think anyone would care about my story. But maybe it's time I care about it. The Magnolia Room wasn't just a space anymore. It was a mirror reflecting back the light we thought we'd lost. And I was no longer just its founder. I was one of its stories too. A living testimony that no matter how far you've been pushed out, no matter how long you've been silenced, no matter how heavy the past may sit on your shoulders, you can rise. And when you do, the world makes room for you. Because your light doesn't ask for permission. It just shines. The ceremony wasn't extravagant. That had never been the point. No red carpets. No orchestra. Just folding chairs on the lawn behind the Magnolia Room. Mason jars filled with wildflowers. And a crowd of people who had once been strangers but were now bound together by something deeper than blood. Truth. It had been 3 years since I returned to Savannah. 3 years since I found the letter. 3 years since I stopped surviving and started living. I stood at the small wooden podium, Grandpa's old lectern, sanded down and painted soft white, and looked out at the crowd. Faces of every color, every age. Former teachers, single mothers, college kids, a retired librarian, 2 war veterans, and a girl who used to sleep behind the building before we built the shelter next door. In the front row sat Madeline. Yes, that Madeline. She didn't come right away. She didn't even come in the first year. But she wrote, once a month. Small steps. She never asked for forgiveness. Just space. And slowly, she made her way back. Not to the family, but to herself. She now led the financial literacy workshop at the Magnolia Room. I don't know what changed her. Maybe watching from the outside while we built something she once tried to erase. Maybe her own quiet reckoning. Or maybe people just change when they finally believe they're allowed to. I took a deep breath. This room, I said, my voice steady, was once just an idea scribbled in the margins of grief. Heads nodded. But today, it's a living archive of what happens when pain becomes purpose. When silence breaks, When one person dares to say, "No more hiding." I looked up toward the magnolia tree in the corner of the garden. It began with a letter, but it lives on in every story we now tell without shame. Applause rose. Soft but steady. After the speeches, people wandered through the building. We had installed a new wall in the main hallway, a mosaic of handwritten letters, some typed, some scribbled, some water-stained with tears. At the center of the wall was a frame, inside my original letter to the woman I used to be, and above it, carved into reclaimed wood, a single phrase, "You are still becoming." People cried there, not loud, just soft weeping, the kind that comes when you see yourself reflected. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the fairy lights flickered overhead, I sat alone in the garden. The wind was gentle. The magnolia petals had begun to fall, drifting like snow. Slow and steady. And I realized something. I was no longer waiting for peace to arrive. I had built it. I had taken all the things meant to bury me and planted them instead. And they bloomed. I thought back to the girl who walked into that lawyer's office years ago. Shaking with rage and shame, the girl who had no voice at that table, no name that carried weight. Just a story no one believed. She wouldn't recognize this version of me. And maybe that's the point. Because sometimes healing doesn't mean returning to who you were. It means becoming who you were never allowed to be. A breeze lifted a petal from the grass and carried it into my lap. I smiled. The next morning, I found a note on the front steps. No envelope. Just a folded page and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a pendant, silver, round, and weathered. It was Grandpa's Dex. The note was from one of the estate's last attorneys who had retired and moved to Asheville. He had held on to it, unsure whether I'd want it. His note was short. "He left this behind in my office. I think he wanted you to have it. Sorry it took me this long. Jeff." I clipped the pendant around my neck. It felt light now. Not because it wasn't heavy, but because I was strong enough to carry it. That afternoon, I walked back into the magnolia room and sat with a group of teenage girls writing their first letters to ourselves. One of them, maybe 15, looked up and asked me, "Miss Luna, do you ever get scared of your past coming back?" I paused, then said, "Not anymore. Because I know now, the past doesn't get to define me. I do." She smiled, like she was tasting hope for the first time. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just another beginning. Because the room we built wasn't just made of walls and letters. It was made of light. And the light, it never left.